The first time the school bell rang that morning, it sounded less like a call to class and more like a warning. The cracked walls of the old government school trembled faintly, dust drifting down as if even the building was tired of standing. Inside classroom number 7, a man sat alone at a wooden desk, scarred by decades of careless carvings, his hands folded, his eyes fixed on a blackboard that still carried yesterday's chalk marks. He had arrived before sunrise, as he always did, even though no one noticed. He was a teacher, and this was the quiet beginning of another day of sacrifice no one would ever applaud. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of silent goodness, take a moment right now to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps keep stories like this alive. His name was Arif Rahman, though most people simply called him Sir, without ever wondering who he was beyond the classroom. He had been teaching at this school for nearly 20 years, long enough to watch paint peel layer by layer, and students pass through like seasons. When he first arrived, his hair was thick and black, his shoulders straight with ambition. Now, thin strands of gray framed his temples, and a permanent curve had settled into his back, shaped by years of bending over notebooks and burdens alike. His salary barely covered rent for a small one, room house, basic food, and electricity that often failed him. Yet every morning, he ironed his faded shirt carefully, polished his worn shoes, and walked to school with the same quiet dignity, as if the world still owed him respect. The children began to arrive, their footsteps echoing down the corridors. Some came barefoot, others with bags patched more times than they could count. Many of them carried hunger in their eyes, the kind that made concentrating on fractions and grammar a cruel challenge. Arif saw it all, even when no one else did. He noticed which child's head drooped lower than usual, which one stared too long at another's lunchbox, which one flinched at sudden noises. He never asked questions aloud, because he knew the answers were often heavier than young hearts could explain. Teaching had never been just a job to him. Years ago, when his wife had passed away after a long illness, leaving him alone with memories and a house that echoed too loudly, the classroom became his refuge. The students gave him a reason to wake up, to keep moving forward even when grief pressed on his chest like a stone. He never told anyone that some nights he went to bed hungry so he could bring extra notebooks to class, or that the money he saved by skipping meals sometimes paid for a student's exam fee. These were not acts he wanted praise for. They were simply things that needed to be done. Among his students that year was a boy named Samir. He sat in the last row, thin as a reed, his uniform always clean but clearly too small, sleeves ending above his wrists. Samir rarely spoke, rarely smiled. His notebooks were neat, but often incomplete, as if time itself had run out on him mid-sentence. Arif noticed how the boy's eyes followed the clock more than the blackboard, how he packed his bag faster than anyone else when the final bell rang. One afternoon, as the class emptied, Arif saw Samir hesitate at the door, then leave without turning back, his shoulders hunched like someone carrying an invisible weight. Days passed, and the weight grew more visible. Samir began missing school. When he did come, dark circles shadowed his eyes and his focus slipped. Other teachers shrugged it off, assuming laziness or lack of discipline. Arif knew better. He had seen this story before, too many times. Poverty did not announce itself loudly. It crept in quietly and stole futures when no one was watching. One evening, long after the school had emptied, Arif stayed back to check attendance records. Samir's name stood out, a growing list of absences beside it. Outside, the sky darkened and the power went out, plunging the room into semi-darkness. Arif sighed, gathered his things, and decided to walk past Samir's neighborhood on his way home. It was not curiosity that guided his steps, but concern that refused to stay silent. The houses there were tightly packed, tin roofs rusted, narrow lanes smelling of damp earth and smoke. He found Samir sitting outside a small shack, mending something with careful fingers. The boy looked up, startled, fear flashing across his face before recognition settled in. Arif did not ask questions that night. He simply sat on a broken brick nearby, speaking gently about school, about unfinished lessons, and the importance of dreams. Samir listened, eyes downcast, until words finally spilled out. His father had been injured at work and could no longer earn. Samir had started working evenings at a mechanic's shop, sometimes late into the night, to help buy food. School, slowly and painfully, was slipping away. Arif walked home that night under a sky heavy with clouds, his heart heavier still. He knew the system well enough to understand how unlikely help would be. Scholarships were limited, paperwork endless, sympathy scarce. Yet giving up had never been an option for him. The next day, he began making quiet adjustments. He stayed after school to tutor Samir, so the boy could catch up without fear of embarrassment. He slipped him extra pens, extra notebooks, pretending they were leftovers from the store. On some mornings, he brought fruit and shared it casually, as if it were nothing special. But sacrifice has a cost, and Arif was already paying more than most. His landlord raised the rent. His health began to falter, a persistent cough settling into his chest. Still, he continued, selling an old watch his wife had given him so he could pay Samir's exam fee without delay. No one knew. No one saw him sitting alone in the dark some nights, calculating expenses, choosing which necessities he could live without. As months passed, Samir changed. His attendance improved. His eyes regained a spark. His answers in class grew confident. He began dreaming aloud, shyly, about becoming an engineer someday, about building things that lasted. Each time Arif heard those dreams, something warm stirred inside him, a reminder that his sacrifices were not vanishing into nothingness. Yet the world rarely allows goodness to move forward unchallenged. During a routine inspection, a school official noticed discrepancies in records and questioned Arif harshly. Why was he staying late so often? Why was he so involved with certain students? Rumors began to circulate, fueled by misunderstanding and indifference. Arif was called into meetings, his integrity subtly questioned. He defended himself quietly, providing explanations, never mentioning the personal costs he had borne. The stress wore him down, but he did not retreat. Then came the day his body finally protested. In the middle of a lesson, the room began to spin. Chalk slipped from his fingers, white dust scattering across the floor like fallen snow. He woke up later in a small clinic, the doctor's voice firm but kind, warning him about exhaustion, malnutrition, and the dangers of ignoring his own health. Arif nodded, promising rest he knew he might never take. News of his collapse spread quickly among the students. Samir stood outside the clinic that evening, clutching a folded piece of paper. It was a letter, written in careful handwriting, thanking Arif for believing in him when no one else had. Arif read it slowly, tears blurring the words. For the first time in years he allowed himself to cry openly, the weight of his sacrifices finally acknowledged, even if only by one young heart. Arif returned to school weeks later, thinner but determined. Something had shifted. Other teachers, having learned pieces of the truth, began to help quietly. The principal, moved by student support, arranged a small fund for children at risk of dropping out. It was not a miracle, but it was a start. Samir passed his exams with distinction that year, his smile brighter than the morning sun as he shared the news. Years passed. Arif continued teaching, though he learned, slowly, to accept help when it was offered. One afternoon, during a modest school function, a young man stepped onto the stage to speak. He introduced himself as an engineering graduate, now working on projects to improve local infrastructure. His eyes searched the crowd until they found Arif, seated in the back. The young man paused, voice trembling, and spoke about a teacher who had given up meals, comfort, and health so a student could hold on to a dream. The whole fell silent, then erupted in applause. Arif sat frozen, tears streaming down his face, hands trembling. For so long his sacrifices had been silent, unseen, almost forgotten. In that moment they echoed loudly, not as a demand for praise, but as proof that quiet goodness could change the course of a life. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of a teacher who changed you without ever asking for anything in return, please like this video, share it with others, and subscribe to the channel. Your engagement helps these stories reach more hearts. And before this story ends, I have a special request for you. Please comment below and tell us about a teacher who made a difference in your life, or simply write a thank you for all the silent heroes out there. As the sun set that day, casting a soft glow over the old school building, Arif walked home slowly, his steps lighter than they had been in years. He knew he would never be rich in money, never famous, never remembered by the world at large. But somewhere in the future, bridges would stand, machines would run, lives would improve, all touched indirectly by a teacher's quiet sacrifice, and that, he realized, was more than enough.